Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to another exciting podcast of Victorious Friday. I always say I have some amazing guests, and today we don't disappoint. I mean, I'm bringing them all the way in from the West Coast. I mean, these guys are spectacular. In fact, one of the guys I've already decided I'm going to dislike today. He's a Pepsi guy. I'm a Coke guy, but we kissed and made up. It's all good. I'm eating Frito Lay, so it's all right. But Terry and Rusty, welcome to Victorious Friday.
Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome to be here.
Man, I tell you, I'm excited to be talking to you today as we talk about your new book, The Faith Code. I mean, it's exciting and the materials. I've had a chance to read it. I had to, do a little wrestling with my wife. You should have sent me two copies. I've got one copy now. I've got to go buy her a copy, which is a good thing for you. you know, Hey, tell me a little bit about before we jump into the book. I want to just maybe pause and take a step back and walk me through your upbringing. Walk me through the early days of your life. What was your faith journey like? What was home life like? And just kind of give me some background on yourself, who you are, what you do, how you do it. And
Yeah,
Terry, let's start with you since our name kind of rhyme,
it
and
does.
then
My
we'll
name
go
is
to
Terence
Rusty.
too. Yeah, no, I've been pastoring here in San Francisco for now almost 4 decades. Since I was a youth pastor, really, actually. So I've been born and raised here in San Francisco. I'm kind of a native son in that regard. I grew up in a home that fell apart when my mom and dad separated and ultimately the family broke apart when I was just about 12 years old. My grandfather, my dad's father, was a pastor in San Francisco. He was a bivocational pastor. He drove a muni bus here in the city. And I remember growing up as a boy and getting on his bus. And I also remember him being a pastor of a very small church. And at the time, the reason I'm bringing this up is because when my dad left and that whole thing blew up, he became a very important person to me, taught me about loving God, and modeled faithfulness even without a lot to show for it. He was extraordinarily faithful with the small church that he was pastoring. Like I said, you never really saw it grow in a large way. But in his later 60s and 70s, it just intersected in a beautiful way with my life and my own calling from the Lord. I was in high school when I really, and this is mentioned actually in the Faith Code. I talk a little bit about the experience I had at Center Court. But it was my sophomore year when I really had a deep experience with Jesus, and I was touched, if I can use this language, by the Spirit of the Lord, and in such a way that it really radically altered the trajectory of my life. I spent a lot of times in the book of Ecclesiastes thinking about meaning and purpose and what it meant to live counterculturally for what I was in and walking to the beat of a different drum. So anyway, I started to really in a true meet Jesus. And that ultimately led me to a moment where I was I was on my way to at a camp, a Christian camp. I was on my way to doing a devotional, still a teenager, and the Lord impressed upon me when I was in the moment of reading a small devotional, Luke 22:32, where it says that, and this is going to sound a little jarring initially, but it was the Lord's statement to Peter about his ultimate fall and restoration. He said, Satan has desired to sift you as wheat, but I have prayed for you. And when you are restored, I want you to strengthen your brethren. And it was as if the Lord said to me, that is going to be my purpose for your life. If you commit yourself to it, you will succeed. And if you do anything else, even if it's successful, and do not do this, you will fail. And that started me on the course of being a shepherd, and it's something I've been doing all my life now here in San Francisco. I joke seen so many pastors now come and go. I've I've sort of went from being the young guy pastor to now someone who is one of the few remaining ones at this stage in my life. So yeah, Faith Code for me was a product in many ways that reflects some of that experience, and
Mhm.
also engaging with people along the way, which I've had the chance to do. So that's a nutshell
Yeah.
of I mean of how God really changed my life and stirred my story
Oh,
in the way that
Terence,
it's ended
yeah.
up.
Well, that's awesome, man. I think back on it, right? Just so many nuggets in that story in a short period of time, and I'm sure so deep. One is the impact of your family and the
Yes.
experience of separation of the family in terms of parenting.
Yep.
Um, and I look at that as I just had Barner on just a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about spiritual, biblical worldview is typically shaped between the ages of
Hmm.
3 and 13 years of age. And so you were going through a very critical phase in your life that was impacting. But yet, it's just so amazing how the Lord moves in mysterious
Yes.
ways and can work through all circumstances. And yours is an
Yeah. I
example
mean,
of that.
if I could add one thing to that, Terence, I was thinking about the impact of my grandfather's life, uh, because he ministered and served the Lord, as we are all invited to do in different ways and different venues, with sincerity and humility, with not a lot to show for it that he could see. And his greatest impact, and I want to hopefully encourage some people here,
Yeah,
his greatest impact of his ministry occurred with a group of younger adults, some women as well, when he was in his late 60s, and actually his early 70s was the time of his greatest impact.
yes,
uh, and it showed up in the difference it made in lives that have extended themselves far beyond his own lifetime for Christ. And so I want to encourage some of us. We may feel sometimes that we've lost a lot. We haven't really made our mark, but don't always see things from that necessarily. God has things that He can do at different stages of our lives that may shock us in terms of what they ultimately echo into as far as eternity is concerned, what really matters
absolutely,
to God.
absolutely. Rusty, give us a little bit as we look at your story. Just kind of give us some early years and impact stories at all.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think my story is one that, in some ways, might say that I shouldn't be where I am right now. I was born in Kentucky, grew up in Southern Indiana. My father was a radio and television personality in Louisville, Kentucky, and so my mother was a nurse, became ultimately became an educator in the health field, in vocational education. But my father, it was a bizarre time because you grow up and he was a sort of a big fish in a small pond. I got used to, you know everyone knowing my dad was on the radio, my dad was on television, seeing a billboard here and there, with my dad's picture on it, and that was sort of everything to me. This guy was the hero. This is what I wanted to be. My mother always says that my first words were "Daddy talks," and that I wanted to be, like Daddy. And my parents were. It was a modest upbringing. It's just sort of, I would say, average middle class. But they went above and beyond to make sure that my brother and I just have one brother, were very exposed to the arts. We both got lessons to anything we wanted to play piano. We both took ballet. We both took tap dancing for 10 years. And so we were very, very exposed to the arts. And so it was a very sort of vibrant, always had music on, all that good stuff. And then when I was 18, my father dropped me off at college, and that was at Hanover College, and I got a letter the following week from him that said, I really think it would be best if I have no contact with you or your brother or your mother any longer. That I'm going to go off with a high school sweetheart that's who I really loved, and I'm gonna move on. And that was really difficult because I had been raised. My father was also, he was initially Catholic, very involved in the Catholic Church, very involved in, I guess it was called Vatican II, where all of a sudden it went from Latin to English, and and the priest began to turn around and look at you versus look away. And he was very involved with that in the city of Louisville. But he had a radio partner. He was the disc jockey, and he had a news partner, a guy by the name of John Hall. And John was a believer, and John had led my father to the Lord. And we left the Catholic Church when I was probably 5, 6 years old, and started going to a non-denominational Bible church in Louisville. And I was 8 years old when I accepted Jesus. I remember exactly where I was. It was August 8th, 1970. And I was sitting in in this church, and it was basically sort of, Terry, probably what it felt like sometimes with your grandfather. It was basically a living room, of a big house that had been kind of refashioned for the day to be a church. And the pastor was talking about, do you want to accept Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior? And I can remember my hands being on one of those steel folding chairs, that are like that brown beige color, we've all remembered. And I can remember holding on to them, and that seat being so hot. I can remember my hands so hot. And when the service was over, I said to my father, I said, I think I want to do what the pastor just said. And he said, "Oh, that's great." So afterwards we went, and, and I accepted the Lord, and was baptized shortly thereafter. And then we ended up going, just leaving that church and joining what would be described today as a mega church in Southern Indiana. The name of the church was Graceland Southern Baptist Church. The pastor's name was Elvis Markham. So I always tell people I grew up in a church named Graceland with a pastor named Elvis. So, that was craziness. And somewhere in my early teens, mid-teens, in high school, the church had a division. The church decided it wanted to go much more Pentecostal. There were those who didn't want to do that, and somehow or another, and I don't know the full story, but my father got caught up in the midst of that, and we ended up leaving the church and almost being shamefully pushed out of the church. And then not that long after, I was off to college, and I got that letter. And so as I rewind my life, I look at that and some of the other things. My father was, unfortunately, my father was, he was a racist. He was a George Wallace supporter. He was John Bircher. He was the N word was a word that was common and familiar in our household. And when I look back at all of it, I say, I should be a church guy. I shouldn't like church, because church would be damaged. I felt damaged by the church. I probably shouldn't be someone who believes in the power of long-lasting relationships, because what my father modeled. And I probably should be somebody who has much different views about other people, because the way I was shaped, as you were saying, when we're very young, was to think that there were, if you were a white male American, that's what my father told me, you're the most powerful person in the world. And he sat me down one day and he said, if you've got a U.S. passport, you're white and you're a male, you are most powerful, and you will disappoint me if you don't use all those to your advantage. He said, so I should be somebody else because of the way I was raised. But the reason I'm not those things is because of what happened in 1970. Because, I accepted the Lord. And, I'd like to tell you, Terence, that, I lived my life to reflect that, consistently. I didn't, as many of us didn't, as we went through our college years and our early years of adulthood. But today, there's no doubt about it that that's the only reason that I'm sitting here having this conversation with you.
Wow. But thank you so much for sharing that, Rusty, and Terry, your story as well. When it just hit me in so many different areas, growing up in Chicago, all my life, and certainly faced, many challenges growing up as a young man. But I just remember just my mom and my father's impact and stories. I've one story I'll share, when I was 8 years old and in the 60s, and things were going on with the marches and different things. And we were certainly being challenged at schools as we were integrating schools and different things like that in Chicago. My father set me down, which motivated me. He said, he said he really believed that everyone had intrinsic value. And he was a big believer in that. He was a big believer in business and was challenged in that area. But he set me down. I was 8 years old. He says, I don't know what motivated him, but he said, you're gonna grow up in a different world than the one I've experienced. Mm. And my challenge to you is to make a difference in that world. He says, he says, you're going into a corporate space. Once you go into that space, he said, I want you to remember a couple of things. One, the decisions you make not only impact a brand, it's going to impact people. Number one. Number two, you can change the very culture of corporate America. That was his challenge to me. I'm 8 years old. Now, I didn't understand all what that meant. It's like, what but I believed it because it came from him, right? And he was one, I looked up to him and my mother and so forth. So he was like, you're going to have an impact on the very culture. So I actually pursued not a position, not a job, not a title, but to be able to impact the culture of corporate America. And the reason he felt that was so critical is because he felt that the church and corporate America and things like that had influence, that they could make a difference, but the marketplace had an influence on people's lives. And so when I think about your story, and really, as you know, it's about a personal relationship with Christ. And the Lord is moving in so many different ways. That's why I wanted to hear your story, and I thank you for sharing that. And then I think about there was motivators to write this book, The Faith Code. And in that, it's a future-proof framework for a life of meaning and impact. And think, you could have went in so many different directions. Both of you guys could have went in so many different directions because at a pivotal time in your life, I mean, that was a major shift or challenge that you could have faced. You could have went left or right, but the Lord had you come center. The Lord had you come center. So let's jump into it. I want to talk about your new book, The Faith Code. What was kind of some inspiration, what motivated you to kind of come together and put this great piece of work together?
I can jump in on that one. It was a process of engaging the different ways in which we were trying to honor the Lord in our lives. So it was a product also of a relationship that had been built over years. I remember when Rusty came to the church, and he came heavily involved, as you were, Terence, in the marketplace. I mentioned he was with PepsiCo, and he also had other endeavors that he ultimately would be connected into, corporate like EA Sports and such. Highly involved in all of these other areas, and ultimately became a CEO in his own right. And so the relationship that we forged gave me a perspective around the marketplace that I really didn't have, because I was am and still am a church man by my occupation, vocation, but also calling. And my job is to impact and to help equip people to represent the Lord outside the time when they come together as community. And so that relationship that we were able to forge, even at times under duress, because I'm a slightly more conservative person than Rusty is, in our, social political views sometimes. But at the center of that was Christ. And I came to appreciate his love for the Lord. And we were able to reason together and experience tough conversations together, get further understanding what it means to represent the Lord in our world. And then we ultimately said, wow, we wondered what would it look like to share some of the things we've learned in the engagements, in the sharpening, if I can put it that way, the iron sharpening iron aspect of our relationship, that we felt would be extremely apropos in regards to the unique challenges of the culture in terms of representing Jesus in the marketplace specifically. Like, how do we, but also around the idea of building a life that is capable of enduring a lot of different things that go on in the culture. And how do I keep a centered life in Christ? How do I keep a firm foundation and apply that into my relationships, into the workplace? So yeah, that was a product though of our relationship together and the evolution of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had given a talk where I went to school at Purdue University a little over 20 plus years ago, just right after the iPhone had come out, and we started to hear these things called apps, and so I'd given this presentation called "Are You Building Your Life as a Platform or an App?" And basically, it was, are you building your life, with this platform that gives you, all the things that a platform should have? Should it be consistent, dependable? Should it always be stable? When we pick up our phone today, we have no question whether or not that thing is going to work every day. We know the platform works, but we also know that there's a whole bunch of apps on top of it that, sometimes don't work. They come, they go, they crash, they get wonky on us. We can't figure it out. And so I just posed the question, what's your life? Is it a platform or is it an app? And it really resonated with these college kids and professors, so people would come back and they'd ask this question, they'd say, a couple of years later, 3 years later, 5 years later, people go, I still remember that presentation. I'm still thinking about, is my life a platform or an app? And Terry and I having these conversations that we would have every week, along with our very dear brother, David Brickner, who we would ask you to pray for, he and his organization today. He's the executive director of Jews for Jesus, and has a number of missionaries today. As we're recording this, the Hamas-Israeli conflict, the war is underway, and so he's under a lot of pressure. But he's our dear brother, and the three of us would come together, and we would get together as a small group, accountability group, and we started talking about these concepts. And I think it was Terry's idea. Said, this would be a great thing for us to have a message series on. And so we actually did. We had a 12-part message series where Terry would preach, and teach on the foundational principles and the platform principles. And then he had me, along with this amazing media team, do these videos, little short videos, 4 or 5 minute videos that we went all over the city and all over the Bay Area doing, just to show that there's some applications that you could take outside of the church and take this message into your life and into your work. And that went really well. The church received it very positively. And then I think it was a few years later where we said, wow, we did all this work. We should probably turn it into a book. And that was, what was that, Terry? 8 years ago that we've been working on the book. So
wow.
the faith code is an output of a lot of different things, coming together. But as Terry said, the consistency of relationship, staying in the conversation, hanging in there, wrestling with life, doing all those things, there's so many learnings that we can get from each other in fellowship that we wanted to bring some of those insights and see if they could help others.
Well, man, that's great. One of those insights and one of those attributes you talked about was this love concept, right? And in there, I was fascinated. We're going to get into some other things, but what I want to jump into is You mentioned five minus of love, or mindsets of love. Walk us through that. What unpack that for us.
Well, we kind of start with the idea that love we like to play little acronyms in the book, and so we say that love cares. Love cares. And in order to reflect true love, you have to have this characteristic of caring. And so we take the word care apart and we talk about, first of all, love is very creative. Our Heavenly Father, we are created in His image, and He was a creator. And so that our love is very creative, and it should be. And so then we go from there that, love, actually, the mindset thinks abundantly. We shouldn't have a small mindset as it relates to if we're going to have the abundant life that God has given us. And so we want to think that, while the resources of the world are limited, and, we can't have everything that we think we're going to have, and, and power, takes things from us and gives things to us, but yet, God's love, the love we're talking about, is abundant. It is unlimited. Thirdly, we say that love takes responsibility. You can't be somebody who is trying to reflect God's love and not be responsible. And that word responsibility is a strong one. I mean, we, in the business world, we like to say the buck stop, like President Truman did, the buck stops here. That show Billion says, I'm the buck right now, like with love, we should feel like the buck stops here. We have responsibility. Fourth, we say that love empowers. Love's not top down. It's not a do what I say thing. It is the ability to be able to empower others to use the gifts that God has given us, to take love into the marketplace, into our relationships, wherever we are. And then lastly, the mindset is that, love stewards. Like, we are to be stewards. We're to be stewards of everything that we've been given. While it all belongs to God, He has given us the ability to steward that into the world, and to think of ourselves like a farmer. We've been given something that we can sow, we can water, we can reap, we can harvest. But we must look at that and say that we believe that love is to be stewarded. And you put all that together, it really means that, to use a word that's topical right now, and generative artificial intelligence, the word generative, we think love is regenerative. That love actually is a great big win-win for all of us. Yeah. And that we should embrace that mindset, the mindset of cares, that we talk about in the Faith Code.
With that as the foundation, Terry, I'd like for you to get in and just explain exactly when I talk about the Faith Code. What should I walk away with? I mean, what is it?
Well, I mean, the Faith Code, I think I'll start by mentioning that there's a key quote that is connected to this idea of the Faith Code. And it's from the ancient Greek mathematician, engineer Archimedes, when he talked about, give me a lever long enough and a place to stand, and I can move the earth. And of course, that folds in so beautifully with what Jesus taught us when He said, if you have the faith the size of the grain of a mustard seed, you can move a mountain. But let's just unpack that for a moment, because it explains Faith Code. When you have a place to stand, this is essentially what we're at. When you have a place to stand, you can begin then to amplify that in different ways. Our place to stand is with the words of Jesus and the things that He taught us so beautifully. That is our source code. When you talk about functioning like a phone, the way that it functions, it has to have a code. And the more elegant that code, the more elegant that functions. And the more precise it is, the more beautifully it moves. And in a lot of ways, the Faith Code is the source code for the healthiest kind of life. It's a life that is built on these sayings of mine. Jesus said, if you hear these words and you do them, I will liken you to one who builds their life on the rock. That is the ultimate source code. How we then amplify that, again, remember the quotation, the idea of a lever long enough. That's something that amplifies our efforts. That's something that extends our capacity. Once we have that foundational place, then how do we apply that, right? How do we then implement that into the dailiness of our lives? So the faith code establishes the foundation and then equips us with practical aspects and ways of amplifying that good intention. And so, each one of those things are unpacked. And when we talk about how to forgive, we talk about how to persevere, we talk about how you can take the faith, the things that Jesus taught us, and use them as leverage points for workplace environment, for example. So that gives it, in a nutshell, a little bit of an idea of what this book at its core is about.
No, that's good. I think about it, and sometimes that code get interrupted, with life, daily life, right? And we talk
Yes.
about we should have joy, we should have satisfaction during this time, the ultimate joy, the ultimate satisfaction, the ultimate peace. But yet life gets in the way, and the code is kind of
Yes, it
interrupted.
does. That's the real.
How do we manage against that, right? How do we bring forth? How's the faith code kind of activated, if you will, when we have all this murky water in life, and we got to deal with
Well,
those
yeah.
challenges?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of different chapters in the book that we specifically talk about keys for, keeping that foundation in a healthy place. But one of the things I'll just talk about, we'll mention a couple of them. One of them has to do with rhythms of grace. We talk about the need to establish a healthy life pace, a need to follow the example of Jesus that he modeled for us and invited us into a daily life of renewal, a daily life of new beginning. None of us get this right all the time, Terence. We fail, we fall, and to use our Christian language, which is not just made up things. It's we sin, we disobey God, we go our own selfish ways, and those things have impact. They affect us. But the more intentional we are, in fact, we have an entire chapter about intentionality. The more intentional we are about organizing our life around a primary principle. In our case, it's the faith code, which really brings us back to Jesus. It begins to affect how we relate, how we forgive, how we get past our wounds. Each one of those things are covered in a chapter. How we get past the wounds that not only were placed upon us, inflicted upon us by other people, but sometimes even harder ones, the self-inflicted ones. Like, what do we do with that? These are the things we talk a lot about in the book.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
That's good.
I'll jump in here too and tell you that code can get wonky, right? That is anybody who works in that world as a software engineer will know that you build layers and layers and layers and layers of code and lines and millions of lines, and one little thing way down in there can throw the whole thing off. And you know what a great engineer does when that happens? They go all the way back to the source code and they look for the documentation as to why. I mean, great code has documentation next to it. Bad code typically doesn't have documentation next to it. And, when companies go buy companies or you go and evaluate, or one engineer comes in and takes over from somebody else, they'll look at it and they'll say, well, it's not documented. There's nothing here. Well, here's the great thing. Our source code is totally documented. All we got to do is go back to it. It's God's word, right? It's right there over and over and over that we can go back to it. And when things get, an app in our life feels like it's going, astray or starting to feel like it's crashing. And those apps, by the way, are things like our jobs, our relationships, where we live, right? The things around us, the things that, we look out in the world and we go, oh, well, this is how I go and I enjoy myself. This is how I rest and this is how I relax. And, all of a sudden, Terry's a big mountain guy. Like, he loves to go into the mountains. That's where he plugs in into God, and he loves to do that. Well, when we have things like fires out here, and he can't go. That's an app in his life that's like, it's not working. It's not working. But if that's what he depended on only to rejuvenate himself, and that was taken away from him, well, his life would go, it would go astray. But that's just an app. You go back to the framework, to the platform, to the source code, and the source code rejuvenates. The source code takes care of it. So, and the other thing I'll just say about that, all of this, is that, in the faith code, what we want people to really walk away with is that, underlying all of this, the power source never falters. It never crashes. The power source of Christ is always on, ready to be plugged into. And that we can always count on.
Yeah, that's powerful. Despite life circumstances, we can fall back, and what is always kind of centers us is the faith code.
That's right.
And we know what that looks like. And, as I look at this, it's powerful, because it's when we're challenged with, real life issues, health issues, job issues, relationship issues, whatever they may be. I think that's where we see our real character. That's when we really know what our true faith code is. Because we can fake that faith code. That faith code can be operating, but not really operating.
Yeah.
But when we're in those circumstances, it's real or it isn't real. It's active or it isn't active. And we can't fake it because that faith code is real. When I look at this,
it's one of the reasons, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why in the book, we ask you to ask a question. What do you love? What do you love? And to take that question and really sit with it, because underneath that is the difference between being and doing. Like, we can do a lot of things that we like, and we say we love. There's a lot of things we all day long we'll say, man, I love the NBA. I love, I love running. I love, good food. I love that restaurant. I love that guy. We say it all day long. Those probably aren't loves. Those are likes. But when we ask ourselves, what do we really love? And we get down underneath that, in those moments of crisis, in those moments of when things aren't going the way is going, if we can identify what we really love, what we'll find is the core platform elements of our life are still there. They're still strong, and we can rely on them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's good. That's good stuff. So here's where I want to land this. We've talked about the faith code, what motivated the book, some principles within it. I'd like for each of you to take maybe one chapter or one piece of the book that you want our listeners to walk away with, and give them one or two things that are significant and can impact their life as they think about the faith code and how significant it is. I'll give you a chance, because this is, you're saying this is the framework which we should be attaching to have intentionality for a life of meaning and impact. And I think about some of the areas of our country today. I mean, one of the fastest growing are the don'ts. They don't believe in anything. Their faith code is, they don't realize they do have a faith code. They just don't realize that they have one. It's more of a secular code versus a faith code in the way we think about faith code. But what say you? And you can take any parts that you want to go and share that with us, and why apply this principle to our life. Why should we care? Why is it important? And what impact, if I follow that faith code, if I'm obedient to that faith code, will have an impact on my life? I can, Terry or Rusty, you can.
Yeah, I can start off. I mean, for me, I think probably my favorite chapter is actually, well, at least one of them is that opening one. But if I were to really zero in on something that I want our listeners to maybe be invited into. It has to do with this idea of building the framework. And the 4th chapter talks about the growth imperative. And I'm a believer in continual growth, both incremental growth and creative incremental growth. And the idea is that there's never a period in our lives where we should stop growing, that every season of life invites us into a growth place, that we are invited to cultivate the growing edge. And one of the keys to cultivating that growing edge is to have a vital optimism that surrounds us. That can only happen because when you get older, as you move along and through life, and I was just sharing this with a group of young men this morning, actually, ironically, who I said, most of your life's in front of you. You still have to commit yourself to growth. Be very careful about getting sabotaged by things that will be devastating in terms of potentially sometimes decadal impact in your lives. So if you've got a lot of life ahead of you, keep growing, watch out for the big landmines, stay accountable, stay in community. But for those of us who are older, we start to lose, or moving into our early middle life, we start to lose a sense of a better future. Sometimes we think our best years are behind us. We begin to coast when we should be contending. We begin to grieve things that were, instead of being committed to that growth mentality that says God has something beautiful or something that he can do that can emerge in a way that I never would have imagined. But remember, to quote Wayne Gretzky, I mean, we miss 100% of the shots we never take. And then so much of the kingdom, and I'll just conclude with this, that Jesus teaches, and we talk about this in the 4th chapter. So many of his parables were around growth, seeds, planting, right? First the blade, first the blade, then the ear, then the corn in the ear, to quote the older version of scripture. This idea of gradual growth, small beginnings that ultimately outlive us. So that's probably the most exciting thing for me. It's one of the things I love about the book. We talk about it a lot. So that would be my answer, Terence.
No, I love that. How about you, Rusty?
Yeah. So for me, one of my favorite chapters, although you're asking me to, pick between my children here, I love each chapter.
Hey, no favorites, man. Just
Yeah, right. That's right. That's right. No, I really love the chapter that we wrote called "The Irresistible Attitude." And in today's world, who I gravitate to? I gravitate to people who have an irresistible attitude, that are hopeful, that look at life and say, life is flourishing, life is abundant, life is, it's tough, but, I find the great things in my life and I let them lift me up. And I carry that into the marketplace. I carry it into my relationships, into church, into my community, on my civic responsibilities. And, I think we'd be such a better place if we could flip our mindset as a society to having this hopeful, opportunistic, irresistible attitude. And so what we do in the Faith Code is we help you, help all of us not only see, how Jesus modeled that for us and how we can learn from him, but also to look at some things in life, maybe ways that we wouldn't have thought about. And so I use the metaphor of, because I worked in video games for a lot of years, Easter eggs. In the video game industry, we loved to leave Easter eggs, little things that when somebody sees them, it would be a reference to something in pop culture, or it would unlock a new code, or you'd get a little badge or something. But the only way you could get those is by playing the game and being in the game and paying attention. And all of a sudden they'll just pop up. The Pixar, the movie company, is fantastic with Easter eggs, because we can sit there, we can watch a Pixar movie, and we as adults will look at it and go, "Oh, I know that reference." And we'll laugh about it, and our children and kids will be sitting there, they'll be laughing too, but they don't understand why we're laughing, right? But we got this little moment of joy, and life is full of those. Our work is full of those. Our relationships are full of those. Walking down the street, what we see around us, being in nature, God gave us all of these little Easter eggs that if we tune our attitude to be able to look at it and say, I want to find these. I want to see these. It's just an uplifting way to live. And so we go into that deeply. And I would just encourage, anybody who reads the Faith Code to enjoy that chapter, because, there's some Easter eggs in there for all of us.
I wish we could go on. And as we talk about the Faith Code by Terry Brisbane and Rusty Rueff, and we're talking about a future-proof framework for a life of meaning and impact. How can our listeners get a copy of your book?
Well, we have a website that we've set up. It's called thefaithcode.com, thefaithcode.com. So that's easy. But obviously, anywhere you buy your online books, they're available. And in most bookstores across the U.S. now, they are available. If you walk into a bookstore where there isn't one, all you got to do is walk up to the person at the counter and say, "Hey, I'd like to order a copy of the Faith Code," and they'll have it for you, right, just like that. But
fantastic. Well, I like to encourage our readers to get at least 10, one for yourself and then 9 for your friends. So
they are great. They are great. It is great for small groups.
Yeah.
So we did right at the end of every chapter. There's questions to be asked.
So is there a small group study for it? By the way, have you developed a small group study?
In the book, at the back of it are study questions for small groups.
Fantastic. Yes. Fantastic. So let's make sure they know exactly where to get that. What was the URL again? What was the website again?
thefaithcode.com.
Awesome.
So just the book's name, Faith Code, with the in front of it, thefaithcode.com.
Well, my new friends, Terry and Rusty, I tell you, I'm so thrilled by what you guys are doing. As we close this section of Victorious Friday, it reminds me of something we encourage the parents. We all have a faith code of some sort. We have a code within us that's our operating, that's guiding our operating system. And I believe we touch base on one of the many faith codes within us, but it's anchored in this code of love. And this code of love didn't come from us. The ultimate faith code came from something and someone from above. And that faith code can never be broken. I think Rusty said it well. It's always operable. It never fails. It never shuts down. It never turns us away. It never stops loving us. It's not conditional. It's unconditional. And so parents, as we begin to instruct our children in the Lord and be intentional in that spiritual growth that Terry talked about, how do we anchor them on the ultimate faith code, the code of love and grace and mercy from a sovereign God? I think those are powerful words, but I like to end my show with my guests giving their parting words. And so, Rusty and Terry, if you would give us some parting words to inspire our listeners today. They're listening, they're tuning in, they've heard your amazing comments, and now give them one thing that they can walk away with that will encourage them as they go through this daily life and the rhythms of life.
Go ahead, Rusty.
Well, I'll jump in first. I think in today's world and the messages and social media and everything that we get around us is, everyone's trying to show that they've built themselves up and, everything is so great. And, we know in real life that's not real. But what I would like to say today to lift people up is, in God's eyes, you're good enough. And in fact, you're great. And that, if you rely on God's code, you live a faith code, you believe, and you are striving to be in God's will, no matter where you sit or where you stand, in God's eyes, you're not just good enough, you're great.
As for me, Terence, just talking to all of your listening audience and your families that you mentioned and referred to, it would be not to underestimate the potential of generational impact. I do believe strongly that the decisions we make have an effect on the generations. He is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There are things that the Lord wants to do that will live beyond you. And if we allow him and we are willing to cultivate intentionally growth in our lives, but even more, to challenge the unworthy things that would root themselves so that we can become a better version of what God has created and intended us to be, a new creation in Christ Jesus. I'm not going to suggest that that just happens, that we just slap an easy phrase. It's a product of a commitment. It's a product of a choice of life, and it's worth it. That's what I would say. It's worth contending. Shoot your arrow into the future. Leave behind a blessing. Walk with Jesus. You'll never regret it.
Man, that's wonderful. You know, I'm so thrilled and blessed that Terry and Rusty, you guys joined us today. And I realized as you were sharing that, is that our designer of the faith code is the sovereign Lord.
Amen.
Yes.
I mean, he's the top designer of all designers. I mean,
Right.
you can't get a
Grand
better
designer.
designer than that.
That's it.
Right?
That's
And
right.
the gift, although not free, because obviously at the end of the day, he paid the ultimate penalty, but it's free. You can't earn it. We can't buy it. We can't do it. Here it is right on the cross. Thank you guys for just a wonderful message. Have a blessed one. Again, remember to go out, take a look at the Faith Code, by Terry and Rusty. It's in all the stores, Amazon, whatever. But if not, request it and
That's
get your
right.
10 copies, and they'll be more than happy to accommodate you. But God bless you guys. Appreciate you.
Lord bless you, Terence.
Bless you. Thank you.